One takes it. Why not?
That head waiter had to give it back.
Indeed? Why?
Because I had all my meals in my room. I mean, I didn't even come to the table at all. So, naturally, the men wanted their money back.
Oh, mademoiselle, I beg you.
Do you want me to have all my meals in my room?
It must not be, mademoiselle.
Of course. If Mr. Henry Spofford III is seated at my table...
Oh, it shall be, mademoiselle.
Rockwell Hunter.
Rockwell Hunter? Oh, his name sounds very influential. His name only so happens to be Rockwell Hunter. What do you do?
I've never been involved in a Hollywood fight or feud, Marilyn once said. I have a wonderful memory for forgetting things. Early in her career, she was the target of Joan Crawford's sharp comments, which made her reluctant to criticize other stars. However, Marilyn often felt deeply insecure around younger actresses, particularly blondes. A notable instance of this was her sole public encounter with her rival, Jane Mansfield. The images above depict Jane approaching Marilyn, who pointedly ignored her after the New York premiere of The Rose Tattoo in 1955. While it can be tempting to read too much into photographs, the overall impression here is quite striking. Some might suggest that Jane was attempting to create a photo opportunity at Marilyn's expense, but Marilyn's very public snub was both graceless and humiliating. Often labeled as the poor man's Monroe, Mansfield was a star in her own right. Their rivalry, more akin to a Cold War than a genuine feud, is explored in a cover story for the April 26th issue of Closer Weekly. At a party at New York's Hotel Astor in 1955, two iconic actresses nearly crossed paths. Jane, the star of the Broadway hit Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, stood on one side of the room, while the renowned film star Marilyn sat at a table with her back turned to the younger woman. According to biographer Frank Ferruccio, Jane was enamored of Marilyn and wanted to go over, but Marilyn snubbed her. The slight was painful for Jane. Despite being very confident, it was difficult for her to be rejected by her idol. Marilyn's jealousy was not unfounded. Although there were many curvy blondes who followed in her footsteps, Jane's striking 40-21-36 figure was just one of her many appealing qualities. She excelled as an actress and nightclub singer, had an IQ of 163, and possessed a genius knack for generating publicity. According to her son, Tony Clymer, Jane admired being the center of attention, but it wasn't only her work that distinguished her. She also cared a great deal about being a good mother. The Hollywood industry came calling after Jane became a sensation on Broadway in 1955. Jane made $2,500 a week, twice the salary Marilyn was paid when she started, says Ferruccio, who signed with 20th Century Fox, the same studio where Marilyn was under contract. They were pitting Jane against Marilyn because Marilyn was giving them a hard time and was no longer interested in playing dumb blonde roles, he says. The ambitious Jane didn't mind playing dumb, although she won the Golden Globe for her dramatic role in 1957's The Wayward Bus. She also courted publicity and made friends with the media, unlike Marilyn. Jane would pose for any person anywhere at any time, says Ferruccio. She was a very driven woman. It was in her blood. Jane was the subject of gossip, and it wasn't always nice. It is said that Jane had love affairs with both John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy. This rumor, according to Ferruccio, was invented by one of her biographers. She would have been pregnant with Mariska Hargitay by then, so I dismissed it. I believe this was said in order to give the impression that Jane was trying to mimic Marilyn. But like Marilyn, Jane also died tragically at a young age. The 34-year-old performer was killed when the car she was riding in rammed into a truck late at night in a dense fog. The 3 adults in the front seat died instantly, but Jane's children, Mickey, Zoltan, and Mariska, sustained only minor injuries. Jane's greatest regret would be not growing old with her children, says her son Tony. But I can also tell you that she never really left. She lets her presence be known, and it's so Jane. Do you think Marilyn Monroe ever really felt threatened by Jane or had any bad feelings toward Jane, or do you think it's just a fan's made-up story? Let me know down below. Next on our list are Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine. Their relationship is known as Hollywood's ultimate sibling rivalry. According to Joan, the fighting began shortly after she was born, with 15-month-old Olivia being less than pleased about having to share their parents' attention. The situation only worsened from there as the sisters spent their childhood bullying, berating, and even physically fighting each other. Olivia might have believed she had an advantage over her younger sister when she launched her career as an actress, achieving her big break in the Hollywood adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream and starring in a series of films alongside Errol Flynn. However, Joan, after a brief period working as Olivia's chauffeur, soon followed in her footsteps by signing a contract with a rival studio. Nonetheless, Olivia was able to retain the family name as Joan's new employers deemed Hollywood too small for two de Havillands. Both sisters experienced rapid success in their film careers. They dated many of the same men and were both considered for the iconic role of Melanie in Gone with the Wind. Olivia eventually landed the part. They were also nominated in the same category at the 1940 Academy Awards, where Joan won. Olivia received her own Oscar a few years later, but famously snubbed her sister when Joan tried to congratulate her. Their tumultuous relationship never fully recovered, although there were occasional periods of reconciliation. Joan's death in 2013 ultimately put an end to any possibility of true reconciliation between them. Another diva on Diva is Betty and Joan. These two iconic Hollywood stars took different paths to fame. Joan, born Lucille Le Sueur, escaped a difficult and impoverished childhood by becoming a dancer. She eventually made her way to MGM Studios, where she carved out a niche for herself in roles that highlighted her persona as a scrappy yet glamorous star. On the other hand, Ruth Davis, nicknamed Betty as a child, attended boarding school and worked on Broadway. Initially, she struggled to make a name for herself in Hollywood, partly due to her perceived lack of sex appeal and her unwavering refusal to conform to the rules of the industry. Despite these challenges, she would go on to win 2 Oscars and receive a total of 10 nominations. Bette Davis was generally regarded as the superior actress, while Joan Crawford was undoubtedly the bigger star. Throughout their careers, the two found themselves competing against each other. They reportedly fought over many of the same men, with Crawford's marriage to Davis's former flame often cited as the origin of their rivalry. The situation became even more complicated when both actresses ended up at the same studio, putting them in direct competition for roles. Davis and Crawford did little to dispel the rumors of their animosity, frequently making scathing comments about each other to the eager press. Notable remarks included Bette's assertion that Crawford had slept with every star at MGM except Lassie, and Crawford's biting critique of Davis's acting. "She's a phony, but I suppose the public likes that." For decades, their careers thrived, but that changed when Hollywood's notorious ageism took its toll. By the early 1960s, both Joan and Bette found their careers declining sharply as opportunities for roles diminished. When Joan offered Bette a part in the film adaptation of the novel Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, something that once seemed unthinkable occurred. The two agreed to co-star as sisters engaged in a macabre battle for control over each other. Production on the film only intensified the feud between the two actresses instead of calming the situation. Stories of one-upmanship became rampant, accompanied by accusations of both physical and severe psychological abuse from both sides. Despite the turmoil, the film was a success, and Bette received an Academy Award nomination, while Joan did not. However, it was Joan who stood on the Oscar stage that year, thanks to an arrangement she had made with Bette's competitors. She agreed to accept their awards on their behalf if they won. An attempt at another film collaboration failed when Crawford decided to quit. Years later, after Joan's death in 1977, Bette Davis was asked to comment on the news. She delivered a sharp remark: "You should never say bad things about the dead. You should only say good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good." That certainly stung. The next one on our list is Bette Davis and Faye Dunaway. The rivalry between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford is one of the most intense and toxic feuds in Hollywood history, lasting for much of their lives. This feud was dramatized in FX's series Feud, Betty and Joan. Bette Davis's disdain for Crawford reportedly extended to other actresses who portrayed Crawford in films.
What?
A feud between Bette Davis and Faye Dunaway did not develop like the decade-long rivalry between Davis and Crawford, but that didn't stop Davis from making some pointed remarks about the acclaimed actress. Bette Davis was known for publicly criticizing other celebrities and former co-workers. However, what stands out about her comments regarding Faye Dunaway is that they are not directly related to Joan Crawford. Dunaway is well known for her portrayal of Joan Crawford in the film Mommy Dearest, where she delivered one of the most memorable line deliveries in cinematic history. Davis's experience with Dunaway, on the other hand, comes from the lesser-known 1976 television movie, The Disappearance of Amy. Davis and Dunaway's involvement in the film is, at best, a minor footnote in their respective careers. However, Davis left the production with a profound dissatisfaction towards Dunaway, which she publicly expressed during a visit to The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. In a 1988 interview, just a year before Davis passed away at the age of 81, Johnny Carson asked her, "Who's one of the worst people you know in Hollywood?" Without hesitation, Davis responded, "Faye Dunaway, and everybody you can put in this chair would tell you exactly the same thing."
Who's one of the worst people you know in Hollywood?
That I worked with?
Or that you wouldn't want to work with again? If you don't have to comment on that.
$1 million, Faye Dunaway. Everybody you can put into this chair will tell you exactly the same thing.
When asked for further clarification, Davis explained, "I don't think we have the time to go into all the reasons. She's just uncooperative. Miss Dunaway is only concerned with herself." Although Davis did not explicitly mention the connection between Dunaway and Crawford, two fellow actresses she found difficult to work with, she noted that during the long hours of waiting for Dunaway to be ready on the set of The Disappearance of Amy, she would entertain the others by performing "I've Written a Letter to Daddy," a song she also sings in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, her only film with Crawford. It may be completely unrelated, but when considering someone as wise and witty as Bette Davis, it could be interpreted as a subtle jab at the possible similarities between her former co-stars Faye Dunaway and Joan Crawford. Dunaway never publicly responded to Davis before her passing, but she did share her thoughts about Davis in her 1995 autobiography, Looking for Gatsby. In it, she wrote, "I was silent too long about Bette Davis. I didn't want to engage in public conflicts, and I believe that my silence contributed to the image problems. It appears that Dunaway made a deliberate decision not to speak out against Davis and now regrets not standing up for herself. However, it's likely for the best that Dunaway and Davis never confronted each other while Davis was alive, as her feud with Crawford demonstrated that Davis would go to great lengths to come out on top." And we're just getting warmed up. The next duo is Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor knew of the media's proclivity for spinning a story better than anyone. She and countless other women in Hollywood have been accused of being homewreckers when love came calling, while their partners' reputations remained relatively unscathed, but that's another story. After the death of Mike Todd, Elizabeth's third husband, Elizabeth found herself in the arms of Eddie Fisher, who was married to Debbie Reynolds at the time. Their affair was scrutinized by the public as if under the lens of a harsh film critic. Elizabeth Taylor was cast as Hollywood's villain, while Debbie Reynolds was portrayed as America's heartbroken darling. However, what about Elizabeth, who was devastated beyond comprehension? And Debbie, who felt trapped in her loveless marriage? We seldom heard their perspectives without the influence of news outlets or unfair assumptions. Let's start at the beginning. The two stars had known each other since their early days at the Little Red Schoolhouse on the legendary MGM Studios lot. As a teenager, Debbie was a fan of the already famous child star Elizabeth, who embodied everything she admired about Hollywood. Debbie later became a high-profile celebrity herself, and when she married Eddie Fisher, they were affectionately dubbed America's sweethearts. Later, Elizabeth and Mike Todd fell deeply in love, and the two couples became a famous foursome when Debbie and Eddie attended their wedding as witnesses. They grew so close that when Elizabeth tragically lost Mike in a plane crash just 1 year after their marriage, Debbie offered her support to the overwhelmed Elizabeth. She often sent Eddie over to provide emotional assistance. Before they realized the implications, Elizabeth and Eddie found themselves in a complicated relationship, the gravity of which only became clear once it made headlines. Mike and Eddie were best friends. Eddie idolized Mike, and Elizabeth felt the same way, leading to misplaced feelings and shared grief over the loss of someone they both loved. Behind closed doors, Eddie was struggling as a husband, and although she felt hurt and blindsided, Debbie was quietly thanking Elizabeth for taking Eddie off her hands as she knew their relationship was over. Shortly after, Elizabeth left Eddie for Richard Burton, which created an opportunity for Debbie and Elizabeth to reconnect. Oh, poor Eddie, but can you really feel sorry for him? Neither Elizabeth nor Debbie were inclined to hold a grudge, and as a result, they continued to live their respective lives in the spotlight. They weren't exactly close friends, but they were certainly not enemies. Eventually, they came together again to film These Old Broads. In 2001, a project written by Debbie and Eddie's daughter, Carrie Fisher. Given their extensive history, the two often found themselves engaging in casual bickering, and they even made a lighthearted joke about Eddie in the movie. Up next is Deborah Winger and Shirley MacLaine. According to a People article from 1984, published shortly after the movie debuted, Deborah Winger persistently challenged the cool demeanor of director Jim Brooks. Jack Nicholson recounted that he witnessed Winger tell Brooks, "I hate you." He described a moment during production when tensions rose between them, leading to Winger insisting, "Jim, I hate you." Remarkably, Brooks responded, "Okay, over here for the close-up." It was evident that he was determined to complete the film, regardless of the challenges they faced. Brooks now claims he does not remember the specific incident, but admits that he and Winger had stormy moments during their time together. 4 decades later, he states that all is well between them. When Winger and MacLaine first met on set, they did not become fast friends. Deborah Winger? I didn't know the name, MacLaine told People in 1984. I didn't know who she was. Despite being only about 20 years apart in age, they were worlds apart in terms of style and temperament. MacLaine wrote about their tension in her 1995 memoir, My Lucky Stars, claiming that Winger yelled at her and worse. During one tense moment between the women, MacLaine claimed Winger turned around, walked away from me, lifted her skirt slightly, looked over her shoulder, bent over, and farted in my face. Both MacLaine and Winger were nominated for Best Actress at the following year's Oscars. MacLaine won and delivered a memorable victory speech stating, "I deserve this," from the stage. We're going to wrap it up from here. I'm sure there's more diva on diva drama to discuss. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content. Until next time.